We will start with the presentation of Noellemeyer. He is an expert on soil of the agronomy school of La Pampa University. Thank you very much for being here. I didn't expect to have a large audience with this title that really frightens me. I don't think that this is a hidden cause, because we are perfectly aware of what is ahead of us. All the presentations in this Congress, for all that has been said in this Congress, is carbon agriculture. This is what is coming for all of us. Let's try to understand this better. How can we address this topic? The AGSUS group of the School of Agronomy prepared a protocol to order activities. Why are we concerned with this? This is the cost of climate change. Rather than climate change, I would say that global change. It's more than a change in climate. There is a social change and other environmental changes that are a concern for us, and that change the conditions under which we have to address development. The growth of world population, the increasing soil degradation, this is what we see every day. Climate change is what I consider to be the global change, and food security that we haven't achieved in spite of the genetic progress, fertilizers, green revolutions. In spite of all the technology that we imagine, we have famine problems. Therefore, United Nations that takes into account this concern in 2015 presented 17 objectives to change the consideration of life in our planet, how we have to grow as a society, and how we'll have to manage with other societies. We have to agree with other members of the society. A result of these objectives are expected to be met by 2030. We are not that far away from that. So we need to consider, where are we failing? I will refer to our main concern and where we can do some things, which are the sustainable development goals that are related with agriculture, with farming sector, with farmers, with agronomists. This means to eradicate famine or hunger, more responsible production, more environmentally friendly action for climate. This includes carbon, climate change mitigation, greenhouse gas effect sequestration, and last but not least, the preservation of life and terrestrial ecosystems, the conservation and preservation of biodiversity. So in our place, what can we do? We know we need to produce more This bears no discussion. There's a lot to do yet in this task that really concerns us. We can close the yield gaps, which are very big so far. The possible yields or the potential for yield is much higher, are much higher than the mean yields achieved by the ordinary grower, and this has to do with management. And this strategy of management, we can talk about ecological intensification to adapt the production systems to the cycles of the ecological systems in order to make a more efficient use of the available resources. And from the point of view of quality of resources, use the specific manage that, or site-specific manage that implies zoning the surface area of a farm in different zones depending on the topography, the characteristics of the soil. That means all the characteristics that impact on the productive potential or on the sustainability in that particular environment. In order to comply with CDG 12, the responsible consumption of management, we can reduce the inputs if we improve the use strategy. We are very inefficient in the use of fertilizers, in the use of natural resources, in soil and water. We can improve a lot. We can also introduce renewable energy sources, the cycling of nutrients through cover crops, biological sources. There's a lot we can do yet. Action for climate. This is something this Congress is much concerned with, and this has to do with the possibility of sequestering carbon coming from the atmosphere that plants fix through photosynthesis, and that plant biomass can be fixed in the soil as organic matter. All agricultural soil have lost organic matter. We have a very promising possibility of being able to mitigate climate change. I will focus on this specifically. And finally is the conservation of biodiversity. We can copy this from crop systems using more diverse species. We are talking about crops that are cash crops. More diversification regarding air biomass or type of crop. This will also benefit us because it will provide more diverse micro and macro organisms we have in the soil. And these organisms has a very significant, are historically significant. Antibiotics were derived from fungi, soil fungi. as resistance to antibiotics is growing, we can continue exploring the soil to find new organisms that can produce beneficial substances. This is very valuable, and we are responsible for preserving this. We will talk about carbon that is closely related to the climate action, and we can include this in our everyday work as farmers or as professionals. Carbon bonds exist for quite a long time yet. They certify a specific amount of carbon. Originally, they were carbon bonds from the forestry mass. They were traded. There are many stock exchanges, stock companies that traded carbon bonds. The benefit of fixing carbon during a long period responsible for the emission of CO2, the aircraft industry, chemical industry, can compensate for their emissions, and these carbon bonds are the means whereby this is compensated. And now, a short time ago, in this carbon bond market, included the possibility to obtain a certificate to certificate the carbon in the soil and transform this certificate in carbon bonds. I know that you are all aware of the carbon cycle. And only now the importance of soil has been accepted. The soil is the basis of the development of all societies. We wouldn't exist without soil. What the soil gives us is ecosystemic service. These are the benefits that the soil gives to us so that we can obtain the benefits. There are benefits that allow us to benefit as a society. That chart of the FAO is fantastic because it gives us a diversity of functions that a healthy soil has, so that we can have a healthy and safe life without disasters, because the soil gives us food, fiber, and fuel. Crop production, livestock production is based on the soil, but the soil also purifies the water we need for consumption. In the soil ecosystem, nutrients are cycled, nutrients that are needed by plants. The soil is a sponge, it's a porous system, and regulates floods. When the soil loses its properties and it loses the pores, there's no water infiltration, there is flooding, and this is what we have been observing in most of our country. It is also functional in climate regulation and in carbon sequestration, and it is the habitat for an important variety of micro, meso, and macroorganisms. And what's the condition of our soil now? There are people here know this situation very well. Our soil has lost resilience. When you see the traces of the hoppers that stay there, they remain there, are not erased. This tells us that the soil has lost its capacity to be recovered for self-recovery. It has lost resilience, and this is really it's a concern. But here we can see something else. What happens with this corn? Many plants have been tumbled down. We see here in the picture in the middle, the soil has been compacted. The corn tries to go deeper down with its roots, but it cannot. So this is the fact, or this is what really happens in many of our soils. This is the reason why I and many of my colleagues are working hard on this topic of carbon agriculture, or carbon farming. This allows farmers to work on improving the soil organic matter and therefore recover resilience, recover porosity, and recover the possibility to anchor our crops. More examples of the same, because it does not look nice. As of 2015, this was published in 2017. We are working on developing effective and simple practices to improve carbon fixation in the soil. That means increase organic matter. And so this was the origin of the 4 per 1,000 initiative, Iniciativa 4 por 1,000, because with an increase of 4 per 1,000, all the emissions can be compensated, can be offset. Is this possible? Yes, it is. So now, as a community, farmers, experts, and also the decision makers,
Una gran oportunidad.
We have the great opportunity to be protagonists in a process that will help the environment and will also help us, because it's going to improve our soil's quality and health. So we have degraded soil, and we have soil in a good condition. This is something that my colleagues from Santa Fe and Buenos Aires University worked on. This soil has very good conditions to sequester carbon, because we have unique agroecological conditions because of the climate, soil quality, but also social and economic conditions. We have farmers and growers like yourselves who are Aapresid members, who are open to technological change, who are trying to find soil management solutions. This does not exist elsewhere. So the AGSUS group and those of us working on soil issues, for us, this is a unique opportunity. We have some conditions that make us stand out as compared to all the other countries I am familiar with. So, in fact, there is a lot of confusion. But ultimately, things are quite simple. What we need to do is improve the organic matter level. This is easily said, but it's more difficult to do. But what we know today is that we have made a long way in getting a lot of knowledge about soil carbon sequestration, and we know that the roots are key. Organic matter of roots contributes between 50 and 60% more than air residues. The plants in the rhizosphere have an exudate that attract lots of microorganisms. They feed their own microbiota. There is an amazing microbiologic activity there. So the simple premise is we need more countries. So based on this, and in order to simplify those things that can't be done in practice, we said, let's turn this into a small number of simple concepts. And we know that some people are already doing this. It's only these 8 concepts that will lead to better soil health. The best thing, which is not very clear to everyone, you have to respect what the soil wants. The restrictions that the different types of soil face, and we need to know what I should and what I should not do there, and that defines production system, crop rotation, and special practices I may have to implement. If I have a soil with very thin texture on a slope, evidently I will have to think of terraces. We have to respect the soil, and this ensures that I can use the full potential of excellent quality soil, but in turn, in my field, those areas with more restrictions that are more fragile can be protected. Secondly, I don't have to say this to you. No-till. For us, this is a normal, everyday thing, but in other countries, this does not exist. We have to find high productivity levels. The soil does not need to rest. It is an ecosystem that is fed from the life in it, so no rest, no long fallow, roots all year long. We need to have more diverse species. We need to find the right balance among the different nutrients when applying fertilization so that the minimum will not be used. We also need to avoid agrochemicals excess, especially fungicides, because they're quite detrimental in terms of microbiota. And finally, we have to take care of the transit so that we'll not see those tracks you saw. As a response to what we have to do, how we have to do it, and how we can test and prove it, we developed this protocol from science to practice. And this is what we believe in. We want to translate science into practical and feasible measures. how can I show that I'm doing things correctly? Maybe I'm convinced about this, but how can I show this and prove this to others? So we have a protocol that we are already using. We already have over 30,000 hectares where this is used. We use a structure of visual indicators of soil quality to facilitate manual monitoring. This brings two advantages. I have a number that will tell me what the soil was like last year, and today I will know that last year I had 42.5 and this year I have 47 or 40. But I will not have to remember. And this, in time, connects me with the functionality of the soil ecosystem, because we have moved apart from this. Soil is not just a number given to me by the lab. This will help me to assess all those properties that will not come up in a single sample. And on the other hand, we do sampling of the soil to assess organic matter, apparent density, and carbon stock in 5-year-long intervals. You can then see whether this can become a carbon bond or not. But this is the underlying idea. So, based on our results and on the long-term trials, we can estimate rates of half a ton of carbon per hectare a year in no-till system with cover crops. And in grasslands, we have measured a higher number, but the maximum was 0.8 to 1. I've heard figures that are just not true. They are too high. These are data coming from tests. In the field, those values will probably be lower. You have to bear this in mind. You don't have to expect carbon bonds to be the business of the future. It is related to another process which is about improving soil quality and consequently production, yield, and stability. So every day we certify soil sustainable management based on the visual indicators. And every 5 years, carbon sequestration, which is the difference between the carbon stock 5 years ago and the current value. And that difference is what the soil was able to gain. And in order to do this, we're training agricultural engineers and technical people in the sector to do the sampling, so that there will also be trained people who can interpret this for growers. We get that information, we check it to see whether it's consistent. We summarize some recommendations about the most degraded parameters or the things that are very well. And our idea is not to reward those growers who did things wrongly for many years and now they see a carbon sequestration. We want to work with those who are doing things correctly, and we want to give them something that proves that they're working correctly. Today, Paola told me, I'm afraid that the environmentalists will come, but What will an environmentalist tell me if I am doing things correctly? You have to position yourself and you have to learn to prove that you're doing things correctly. Well, this is our goal, as well as to explain things, and rather than complicating things, simplifying the understanding of these topics. And that's it. Thank you very much. Well, I will now introduce Juan Rodrigo Walsh, who is here on behalf of the Undersecretariat of the Environment of Argentina. The floor is yours. Can you hear me? Well, first of all, thank you very much, Aapresid, for having invited me. I am pleased and honored to share this talk with growers, with people working on conservation, with people who have a modern perspective of agriculture. Many years ago, when I was at a different stage in my life, I would attend Aapresid meetings quite frequently when they would take place in Rosario. I think it's the first time they are doing it in Buenos Aires. And at the time, it was quite innovating to have an environmental agenda at a time when this was not part of our everyday activities. Today's topic, and after Elke's presentation, is going to be very difficult to talk about the potential of carbon sequestrations and all the various alternatives, but I'd like to set the context. In order to understand where we're standing today in terms of this agenda, talking about hidden costs and economic consequences. The discussion about the effects of global warming and the impact on the planet go beyond the environmental field only. It has an impact at the geopolitical, economic, and development levels. Today, those topics, those issues related to the impact of droughts, for example, the difficulty to produce food, something that was also mentioned by Elke in terms of food security. And this is generating impacts and challenges for the population who has to move to find other alternatives, and they have to leave those areas that are undergoing difficulties because of hydric stress or droughts, etc. Today, beyond the controversies and the discussions we're seeing in terms of this agenda, we have seen elections in the EU, there are elections in the US. The environmental agenda is quite present, but behind that, there is an agenda with concrete steps, what Elke was saying, soil quality, soil health. These things are very much related to climate impact, and the good practices bring about several advantages. 30 years ago, I had to participate in one of the first climate meetings, the COP4 that took place in Buenos Aires. Those were meetings led by technical people, scientists, and people working on a very concrete climate agenda. Meteorologists, engineers working on warming. Today, this has changed, and we are seeing changes. 2 decades ago, things started to change, and these topics came up in the political, geopolitical, and economic agenda. If we go back to 2008, the first meeting of the G8, it was G8 at the time, and then when Russia left the group, it became G7. We started to talk about the challenge of global warming for the global economy. And the Stern report was published, and it's important because we started to talk about the impact of climate on ecosystems, productive systems, and the cost for the global economy. This was a landmark report that provided data and concrete numbers to see what the implications, practical implications were, let alone the world of some Nobel Prize nominees. I'm talking about Jeffrey Sachs or Joseph Stiglitz, who got prizes working on the consequences of these problems. And there is recent work, which is quite controversial, about the implications of 1 degree centigrade warming that could have whose impact could be a 12% reduction in the world GDP. These days, I've been reading The Economist, and based on this, the hidden costs and the implications, there's a whole analysis that shows that following these ideas, the work, the value, and the added value of innovation, they were talking about renewable energy, but I think this Aapresid forum, which is what characterizes the sector, is precisely that innovation feature, doing new things, incorporating good practices, new technologies, alternatives. This negative impact, such as the one showed by this study, is eventually reduced, or it is not so serious and has a virtuous effect if you consider all the innovation opportunities. When we talk about hidden costs and implications, these are just some details, but they are related to the international agenda. A damages and losses fund that tries to compensate or reduce the effects of some economic impact. A well-known fact is that a short time before the parties' conference, what happened in Pakistan really pushed this agenda. But beyond what we're seeing internationally, if we take this down to our country's reality and to the reality of other countries in the region as well, every day we see, and now with low temperatures, well, fortunately there's been rainfall in some parts of our province, but fires, how much do fires in the grasslands, for example, cost to our country? A lot, but it's a global phenomenon. The West, there are very high temperatures in the west of the U.S., Australia has also terrible forest fires in agricultural areas with a very high impact on the agricultural economy. So this is clearly part of the agenda, and it clearly forces us to think. And I'd like to add that when we speak about warming and climate impact, many of those reports I mentioned a few minutes ago were focused on mitigation, on emissions reduction. Today, this has changed. I think it's a pivotal change. Now we're going towards adaptation. This helps us get out of the issue who is emitting more emissions, but it helps us provide answers and see how an economy, a society, a country can adjust to the consequences of a scenario with more fires, drought events, hydric stress. This is something that those of us living in the metropolitan area on the river basin may not so familiar with, but 2/3 of our territory are affected by hydric stress. And this forces us to find adaptation method, to find resilience, and to generate public policies.
Productividad.
Droughts and loss of productivity. I don't need to remind you of this, but in 2012, 2018, 2023, we have had the worst droughts in history, and this was the reason or the root cause of the exchange restrictions, currency exchange restrictions, and other kind of restrictions. So an extraordinary event have to do with this mutation in the climate and this kind of effect. In some places, floodings. We don't see this so frequently, but the case of Pakistan or the case in our own country in previous cycles has to do with cost, impact on human health, respiratory problems due to smoke and fire, the effects on oceans and financial impact. I heard a discussion about the need to discuss insurance in this context. This is a hot topic in developed country regarding the real estate insurance and what kind of implication this can have in relation to climate change or sea level in places that are easy where floodings are common. How does this impact on property damage and on the insurance sector? This is an item in the global agenda. Just to remember and to see how important this is, how important climate agenda is in our countries. Some reference people that have been pioneers in our country. Fiorentino Ameghino, talking about the Pampas region, spoke about the long, humid and dry cycles and the impact of this on the Pampas region. It's no chance that Martin Fierro spoke about the desert, because he's referring precisely to this context. Also the works of Vigliso, Andrés Antico, what happens with the region, what is the impact of climate change in time. Discussions that come up again after the tide reduction in Paraná in 2012 20 or 20 to 2023, and what implication a climatic event can have on rainfall all across the continent. This produces an impact all over the region. I remember Graciela Magrin and his hypothesis on global warming and impacts in the region. This regarding the diagnosis. What are we doing, or what can we do in the environmental area in the public sector? I don't want to go further in detail, but there are projects with external support and funding, cooperation agreements. An example of this is the program that is being supported by FAO, the Climate Green Fund, called a result-based payment, or RED Plus or Network Plus, that it calculates the benefits of an ecosystemic program that enabled establishing what would have happened without any public policy whatsoever, and what would have happened with a public policy in place. So, and the difference between what could have happened and the avoided deforestation is translated in a project that is funding activities in rural areas, forest management plans, forest account management in Santiago del Estero and Chaco, in Formosa, and northern Santa Fe, and schemes that are online with what Elke was mentioning. That is a qualitative leap to look for protection of the forestry system, activating the livestock system. Another work we are doing in the area of bioeconomy, I think that now it has changed again, but always with that concept of integrating the productive approach with a mental approach. I think that this is a cross-sectional work that we need to highlight. We are working together with UN organizations, measuring and improving methane emissions management, not considering reducing livestock breeding, but really improve the efficiency in terms of emissions, good practices, good nutrition, sustainable pasture management. Brazil is working along these lines. And I come back to innovation, all the activities, all the actions that are being conducted in this context, Ireland, New Zealand, Australia, and the interest in our country in incorporating variation in food habits to reduce emissions. Elke talked about carbon markets. Engineer Goshonochea, the National Director of Climate Impact, is working on this with us, with me. We know that this has a great potential, a huge potential, and this is an opportunity to do things correctly. I remember I've worked with the old MDL. This was developed. This was found to have some challenges: credibility, certainty, reliability, and this is seen in the difference of value in the voluntary market and the regulated market. So there's much to do there, and we are working that across the board with the agricultural sector, with energy, and with transport. I think that this is the way to work on these topics. I remember that in southeast Buenos Aires province, Some years ago, there was a program that was intended to give value to the carbon sequestration. This was joint work with ACREA, with the LINTA. The idea was to generate a plus in profitability as a result of good practices. And there is a synergy over there between the productive and the financial sector. And this is a good idea to drive, to target funds, interest, and concerns of investors. Nobody will be saved with a carbon bond. Profitability increases, the return rate improves. It's not a project by itself. I think that we are running out of time, so I want to finish and I want to open this to discussion. The Undersecretary of, or the Subsecretariat of Environment is interested in promoting the dialogue between the sector that generates emissions, the energy sector or power sector. Is a sector with a huge potential to capture, to keep, and to sequester emissions through good practices and through the work, the good work that is being done. We have named this table Dead Cow, Living Cow. Vaca viva, vaca muerta. Dead cow, living cow. With the idea is to create an environment in line with the carbon market, but at the country level, because we are concerned with, we want initiatives to become together. We don't want to have separate initiatives. We believe that there is a lack of opportunity or a loss of opportunities and of effectiveness in the agricultural and livestock sector, in the energy sector, always focusing on the Neuquén Basin. There's a lot of work to do here, and in the environmental ministry, we decided that we want to work hard on this and to interact with different areas, overcoming these confrontations or confronting environment with production, environment with forestation, and understanding that the important thing is to generate work, to generate added value. Many of the farmers are really innovative, and they are willing to incorporate science and technology and knowledge. I think that Ernesto Viglisi represents that attitude, because this will provide a huge potential to the country and our region. We'll be glad to answer to questions. We have very little time. This is a question for you, Elke. Who makes the visual sampling of soils in the protocol that you are going to present? Can you, what are you taking into account for the sustainability index? Sampling is conducted by professionals who we train. It's a group of people we identify, we deliver a theoretical and practical course, and then they sit for an exam and they can start. No, you spoke about sustainability rate. That is too much for me. I don't dare speak about that. the value of visual evaluation of soil quality and health gives us a condition of the soil which is poor, moderate, and good. It refers to the condition of the soil. I don't think I can provide a sustainability rate. That is too much, or is sustainability index. It has to do who is the police here, because this is to certify that there is an improvement in the carbon level in the soil. The question is who will have the authority to say that it is okay. The authority lies in the accreditation entity or organization. In this Congress, we met the group of the Argentine Accreditation Organization. We are going to accredit our protocol, and this organization will verify and will monitor environmental management. I think that we would be at the same level. What Juan said, there are many projects that are not really credible that have been completed, and they have been accredited by international organizations such as Gold Standard. So really we don't trust these organizations that much, so we prefer to apply for accreditation with a national government. What do you think, which would be the public policies to encourage and to implement all these practices? I think that there are a number of public policies we are considering in this context, with cooperation and support from the international system. The case of payment by result, RED Plus, is a climate project that is executed by FAO. There is a program from the Environmental World Fund. They address the topic of soil degradation in the northwest Argentina. It intends to have a more rational water management. There is a number of activities that converge. This morning in the Federal Council of Environment, they consider the possibility to work on the water agenda, and so we improved in several areas irrigation conditions and type of irrigations. For instance, the traditional irrigation, which is by wind, to switch to the drip irrigation. Aapresid and many farmers are doing this with precision agriculture, looking savings in energy and becoming more efficient. We have the support of many projects. There is another goal we have set for us, that is try to become more efficient in the implementation of different programs with international cooperation. There are soil degradation programs and other programs that can be brought together. We try to achieve virtuous interactions between these programs. There are UN programs. We have engineer Tomasini, who's a member of the Commission, and this has to do with bringing together cooperatives, farmer groups, collaboration with agricultural areas, rural extension, Aapresid, and the private sector is working on this and trying to dialogue with other representatives of the productive sector to legitimate this kind of activity. There's no legitimation. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Elke. Thank you for the invitation.